First, a little backstory. When I was 19, I lived with my mum in a ranch-style house on a road that backed up to a large field. On the other side was the main highway, and about a half a mile down from me was a loony farmer, and about a mile on the other side of me was, well, pretty much a crack house. I guess someone used to live there, but it was run down. I'll say that the crackheads were pretty quiet. Other than those two houses, though, we were pretty isolated. At the time, I was working full-time and going to school full-time. One of my classes ended at 10:30 p.m. I often wouldn't get home that day of the week until about 11:15ish. I was driving home one night and I noticed some guy walking down the road. He had a yellow shirt and track pants. I remembered his outfit because it looked so stupid. It wasn't weird to see people walking down my road because of the whole crack house thing though, but I instinctively looked over at him when I drove past. He turned and smiled and waved, which kind of freaked me out. So I speed the half-mile home and pull into the driveway, kind of weirded out. I made sure all the doors and the windows were secure, and then sat on the couch to be a paranoid freak, and wait to make sure the dude walked past my house. Except, he didn't. And there was another guy with him, dressed in darker clothes. They actually walked up to my driveway and started playing around with my car, testing the handles and stuff. In my hurry, I forgot to grab my phone from my car, so I was kind of worried that that's what they were trying to get, until the guy in the yellow started approaching my door. I'm obviously freaking out at this stage, so I go up and wake my mum up. She's bleary and I'm trying to explain the situation when we both hear the doorknob turn very slowly. Good thing it was deadbolted. She got out of bed, walked to the door, and then the yellow shirt knocked. I perched up on the couch so I could get a good look at him and his friend, still in the driveway. The porch light was on because of the sensor.
"Yeah, who's there?"
My mum said.
You dropped your wallet."
I told my mum that I had my wallet. It was in my purse, so she calmly told him that she had a wallet, and it was too late to be knocking on people's doors. I remember perfectly what he said next, even though this was about 6 years ago.
Okay, well, I'm not a bad guy, just so you know."
We were all pretty still. No one moved, not even the guy at the door, not even when the porch light went off. And then he tried the handle again. My mum told me to call the cops so she could get the gun, and I told her that I didn't have the phone, so she walked to the kitchen to grab hers from the charger. She handed me the phone and walked to the bathroom, stared out the window into the backyard, and then she went into her room to grab her Ruger. I was talking to the cops and explaining the situation, all while watching these two guys, explaining that there were two suspicious guys at our door when my mum came back out and said,
"There's one in our backyard too,"
which explained why she had looked out the bathroom window. She glimpsed him from the kitchen and went to get a more discreet look. My mum walked back over to the door with a gun and loudly said,
"If he tries that handle again, I'm just going to open the door and shoot him."
Who knows why she said that instead of waiting for the cops to arrive, but the guys took off down the road. I told her and she rushed to the bathroom where the guy, apparently in the backyard, saw his friends running down the road and sprinted off too. They were going in the direction of the crack house. The cops searched our house and our yard and went to the drug house, where they found 5 dudes hanging around. One was the yellow shirt guy, and I'm assuming his friends were with him. They did get arrested and nothing weird like that ever happened again, but I was on edge for a while. I still make sure the doors are locked at all times, even during the day, even though I live in a much nicer area now. Anyway, sorry it was a bit anticlimactic, but the dudes got caught. The following is a story that happened to me about 2 years ago. I couldn't explain it then, and I can't explain it now. I live in Oregon City. It's a short drive south of Portland. I live on the outskirts of where it sits somewhere between suburban and rural housing. I have neighbours, but they're not exactly next door. I was 19 at the time of this story. I used to have a problem with my sleep. I don't know what it is, but I get mentally crippling anxiety and I'd go for a walk to calm my mind. I live on a single-lane road that follows a stream through the woods, so needless to say, the scenery, mixed with a quiet trickle, was always quite calming. It was summertime, and I remember it to be a particularly rough night for me. I remember telling my dad that I was going for a walk as I hurriedly slipped on my shoes and hustled out. I still remember the look on his face as I tried to escape in the midst of my own mental panic. He looked worried about me. My late-night walks had gained frequency at the time, and I knew it was starting to concern him. Nevertheless, I shut the door behind me and proceeded into the dark. I remember it being clear skies, but I don't remember stars. The moon must have been full as well, because I could see the road without light, but I don't remember seeing the moon itself that night either. I remember I just started walking, talking to myself about everything that had my anxiety spiked. I'm sure I looked insane, rambling to myself, but sometimes it helped me to process the issues by just talking it out. From my home to the main road is about a mile. I was about 2/3 of the way to the main road when I heard something rustling in the bushes to my right. This wasn't uncommon. I jumped deer, raccoons, a bobcat, and even a few coyotes on my walks, but I still liked to know what was around. I pulled out my phone and flicked on the light. For context, there's a hill to my right that goes up. This is where I heard the noise. To my left is a 10-foot drop into the creek. I shine my light into the bushes to see what I was dealing with. Usually, these things either freeze or scamper off in my experience, which helps me to know what it is. But this time, there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing there. I don't know what set me off, but my hair started to stick up. I felt scared. I tensed and I realized that the creek should be audible as the water ran over the rocks, but I couldn't hear it like I normally could. Something was clearly wrong. I heard a branch snap in the bushes again. I moved my light back and just saw lights looking back. 2 small red lights, like eyes. I moved my light to see if it was a reflection of something, but it wasn't. Instead, it started to get closer. I ran. I fucking ran. I ran in near silence. I can't remember if I screamed, but I know it didn't matter. I couldn't hear my own shoes hitting the road. I couldn't hear my own breathing or my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I ran faster than I ever had. All I heard was what sounded like an animal with human bare feet chasing me. I don't know what primal survival instinct kicked in, but something told me that I needed to find light. Not the light on my phone that could be squashed, but something bigger. The first place I went for was home. There's a large barn light out front of my family's house. It's bright and covers the whole driveway. I ran like hell because, for all I knew, it was on my heels. And it was. I just remember hearing it getting closer as I ran. It was running me down, but I felt like it was toying with me. Its footstep pattern didn't sound like an all-out sprint, more like a light gallop. It wasn't until I rounded the last corner and the light became visible that all of a sudden it picked up its pace and started to close the distance. I ran full sprint to the light pole as it gained. I heard its furious steps come to an abrupt stop, but I didn't turn back. I tackled the tar-covered wooden light post as best as any 19-year-old kid could. I stayed there, clutching that disgusting, sticky post, just waiting for the end, waiting for this thing, whatever it was, to tear me apart. But it never did. I sat there for an hour in silence until, finally, my phone rang. I had 3 messages and 2 prior calls, all from my dad asking where I was. I lied and said that I fell asleep in a field up the road. At that moment, I realized that I could hear the world again, and assumed that that meant it had left. I ran inside the house and locked the doors. To this day, I don't walk alone on my road, day or night. I know what you're probably thinking. It was probably just your mind playing tricks, or it was probably just an animal. But I've seen animals. I know what animals are near my home. This was nothing that has ever lived here. This story made me think back to some of the other things that I'd experienced out here. Things that I can't explain. A fully grown deer, burned from the inside out, for instance. The only way you'd have known is from the single area in the ribs that had burnt through to the perfectly preserved flesh and bone. Moments where I'd find myself seeming to slip through time. My alarm clock would go off at 6 a.m. and I'd wait outside for my ride for 3 hours, just to come back in and see that it had only just turned to 5 a.m. There were also shadow figures by the side of the road, a couple of unexplained deaths, and the list goes on. I'm telling you that something strange and terrifying is out here. Some nights, I wonder, do my doors and windows really keep whatever it is out? Or is it just toying with me? If anyone has any ideas about what the hell I'm dealing with, please let me know. This occurred when my son was 4 years old, and I'm 100% sure that my kid prevented something horrible from happening to me. It turned into an episode of Law & Order, but with a terrifying ending. By way of background, I live in Milwaukee, which has the honor of being the most racially segregated city in the country. It's a cool city overall, but we have a really shitty inner city with a ton of poverty and violence, and gang activity. At the time this happened, I was living in a short in-between area. Not the ghetto, but not a super nice area either. I was a 22-year-old single mum. I lived in a ground floor apartment on one of the main streets. I parked in the back alley behind the building, and my front door faced the street, and I had a side door too, with a walk running between my building and the one next door. Anyway, I got home in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday with my kid. As we drove down the alley to get to my parking spot, I saw a guy in a hoodie sort of lurking around by my parking spot. It was weird because it was warm outside and he had his hood up, but there were a bunch of gangster wannabe kids in the neighborhood, so whatever. It was definitely an odd place to just be standing though. As I got close to the building and started pulling into my parking spot, he turned around and started walking toward the street, past my side door. He definitely left because I arrived. I figured he was smoking a blunt or something. I didn't think anything of it, and I got my son and some bags out of the car. I went the same way the guy had just taken, to my side door. I didn't see him at all though. My son and we just went inside, and I was in the process of putting stuff down when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I immediately thought that it was this guy. Being young and naive, I answered the front door, and it was the same guy, still with his hood up. He immediately smiled at me, but not in a super friendly way, more of a leer. He looked to be about 16, cornrows, with a fake gold grill that was studded with little fake diamonds. I immediately regretted opening the door. But here I was, so I just went with it. Hi. He kept staring at me and said nothing. At this point, I saw another kid in a hoodie pacing behind him on the sidewalk and looking at us. I was quickly realizing that this was not a good situation. My son, who I had momentarily forgotten about, he came up behind me. And he did this shy kid thing where he stood behind me and he poked his head out from behind my butt to look at the guy. The hoodie dude looked at him for a couple of seconds and then back at me.
Yo, is Danielle around?
I don't know who that is. Maybe try the other door. I gestured to my neighbor's door to my left.
You sure?
Yeah, sorry. And he left. Walking in the opposite direction of my neighbor's door. Hoodie Dude 2 followed him too. I thought it was really weird that they didn't even try to check next door for Danielle. I just thought that the whole thing was really weird. My boyfriend got to my apartment a few minutes later, and boy was I glad to see him. He had a really old Jeep that he always parked out the front on the main street. When we went out to get something from his car, shortly after he arrived, it was gone. Car theft was a pretty common thing in our neighborhood, but stealing it from the main street in broad daylight, that was pretty ballsy. So we called the cops, filed a report, the whole nine. I told the cop about the hoodie dudes, since it seemed like it could have been important. I was able to give a good description of the guy who came to my door asking for Danielle. I had no idea if it was relevant, but the fact that the Jeep was stolen shortly after these guys were around seemed pretty suspicious. And that's where the story ended, at least till 2 days later. Now, I got a call from a different cop within the downtown main precinct. He told me that they had found the Jeep, and other than the ignition, it wasn't damaged. That was good news, and he asked if I could come downtown to do a lineup, to see if I could identify the people who had knocked on my door right before the Jeep got taken. That was weird. A lineup for a stolen car? But I agreed anyway. He asked if I could come down in a couple of days. Also weird that they wouldn't want me to go right away, but I was mostly focused on the fact that doing a lineup was pretty cool. So I go to the downtown precinct a couple of days later. The way this all went seemed sort of unorthodox, but it was what it was, I suppose. 2 detectives took me into a dark room where a woman in her 50s was sitting with a young woman in a wheelchair. The young woman's lower leg was in a giant cast, with this whole metal contraption surrounding it, with maybe a dozen metal rods going into the cast itself. At this point, I had no idea what the hell was happening. The detectives instructed us that we weren't to say anything during the lineup, except if we wanted the guys to turn around again or whatever, and that we couldn't talk to each other at all. Okay. Well, we ended up having to wait in the room for almost an hour, in the dark, awkwardly not speaking. They explained that it was taking more time than anticipated to get 12 guys from the jail over to the precinct. But finally, we got started. They did 2 lineups and gave us forms to mark, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. There was a large window in front of us, and they explained that the guys couldn't see us. They turned the lights on in the room behind that window and brought each guy in individually. I couldn't identify anyone in the first lineup. I sort of felt bad actually, but I couldn't. The second lineup started and I didn't recognize guys 1, 2, and 3. Number 4 came out though, and I immediately recognized the dude who had knocked on my door. He didn't have his stupid grill anymore, but it was definitely the guy. After the second lineup was done, they brought the other 2 women into the hallway and told me to stay put. After a few minutes, they came back to get me. The detectives asked if I recognized anyone, and I told them that I was sure about number 4 in the second lineup, but couldn't identify anyone in the first lineup. I gathered by this point that Hoodie Dude 2 had likely been in the first lineup, but I hadn't gotten a good look at him when he was pacing on the sidewalk. They had me sign 2 forms, one for each lineup, with the second form identifying 4 as Hoodie Dude. When I gave the forms back, the detective told me that they could tell me what was actually going on now that the lineup was done. Good, because I was confused as shit at this point. He explained that number 4 was indeed one of the guys they arrested with my boyfriend's Jeep. The guys had stolen the Jeep and driven to a nearby part of town, into a white neighborhood. I'm also white. This is relevant. They came across a young couple unloading groceries from their car. The young woman with the leg contraption was the female half of that couple. They parked the stolen Jeep behind the couple, got out, and immediately shot them both. They shot the woman in the leg and shot the young man in the dick. He was still in hospital in bad condition, which was why he wasn't there. The older woman was the girl's mum and had brought her from the hospital to do the lineup. The reason why it was delayed for a couple of days was because she had emergency surgery to try and fix the damage to her leg. The guys didn't demand anything from the couple or take anything from them after the shooting. They just immediately shot them. The young woman managed to remember the license plate number of the Jeep, and they were apprehended in a corner store when a cop saw the stolen car parked outside shortly after the shooting. The shooters were both teenagers, but were being charged as adults. One of them had stupidly talked a bit before lawyering up, and had told the detective that it was a gang initiation. They had to shoot a white person. That was apparently the price of admission. They had stolen my boyfriend's car after taking the bus out to the street I lived on. They had figured that it would be easier to get away if they had wheels. The detectives were pretty sure that I had been the original target of opportunity, but couldn't explain why they hadn't gone through with it. Nerves, maybe. But I knew why. It was because he saw my kid peeking out from behind me. They told me I might have to testify if the case went to court, and told me that I'd hear from the DA's office when they needed me. A couple of months later, one of the detectives called me and told me that hoodie dudes pled out to attempted murder charges in exchange for reduced time. The guy who got shot in the dick survived. I didn't ask how many years, but I assumed that they're probably still in prison 13 years later. As an ironic postscript to the story, my boyfriend had that same Jeep stolen from the same spot in front of my apartment about 4 months later, also in broad daylight. At that time, they didn't find it right away. He was staying over at my house weeks later when he got a call around 2 a.m. from MPD arson unit. Apparently, they torched it and left it in the middle of the street in a notoriously violent area of the city. And I moved after that one. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.